Rethinking Satyagraha, reviving a Gandhian ideal as a foundation for architectural practice, presented by Prem Chandavarkar. Mohandas Gandhi's ideal of Satyagraha is not something one normally associates with architectural practice. But if we accept that to create a humane architecture, we must first learn to fully appreciate what it means to be human, it offers a powerful foundation to this quest. My presentation will be in 4 parts. The first seeks to explain what Satyagraha means. The second shows how it finds resonance in our consciousness. The third makes the connection to architectural practice. And a short conclusion suggests that the garden is an appropriate metaphor that can guide our conception of architectural practice. Beginning with the concept of Satyagraha, which is an often misunderstood concept. For dictionary definitions usually give a wrong picture, associating it with the political strategy of nonviolent civil resistance that Gandhi championed in the Indian freedom struggle. Even Wikipedia, which goes deeper, acknowledging the etymology of the word, still clings to the same definition. But this etymology suggests a far deeper meaning, connoting an ongoing and disciplined moral alertness that must continuously work to sustain anchors in truth to avoid getting overwhelmed by destabilizing circumstance. It is far more than a political strategy. It embraces an entire way of life, which raises the question of what one means by truth. We get some clues on how Gandhi answered this question from his autobiography, particularly this wonderful critical edition with incisive notes from Tridip Surud. Truth is not normally associated with experiments, yet the title juxtaposes these two words. It breaks other autobiographical conventions. It is not a singular narrative and was published in weekly installments over a period of over 4 years in his journal Navjivan. Installments sometimes contain factual errors, and some of these were pointed out to Gandhi, and he acknowledged them but did not issue retractions. Yet there seems to be an underlying conviction that all installments hold a consistent focus on truth. To Gandhi, one's body is a sacred site containing far more than self-centered intention or desire. It is imbued with an antaryami, a divine spirit within. Gandhi sought that every thought and action should be shaped by the exhortations of his antaryami. Satyagraha means the discipline to remain discerningly rooted in the inherent wisdom and compassion of one's antaryami. Positions or perceptions may change over time, but truth rests on the consistency of authentic engagement with one's antaryami. Truth is far more than an abstract certainty. It is a dynamic state of being, a consistency of grounded spiritual and moral reckoning. So Satyagraha must therefore be the discipline of a daily practice to sustain awareness of the antaryami as one's transcendental core and align every thought and action with one's antaryami. This brings me to the second section on consciousness, and this connection was a serendipitous discovery. I had a separate interest in consciousness, and I began to find some resonance between consciousness and Satyagraha. And these resonances proved to be highly productive. Gandhi was in many ways a religious traditionalist to whom spiritual faith, unmarked by doubt, was an a priori starting point, and his faith in the antaryami was founded on this position, which could prove problematic to those of us who are not traditionalists in the same way. But if we could find antaryami and Satyagraha in our own consciousness, we would need neither a priori faith nor logical persuasion. For we access our consciousness directly from our own first-person experience. And whatever validation we need, we can find within us as a very fact of our existence. So whatever I say in this section, I ask that you do not treat it as an abstraction that must be intellectually understood. Seek the resonance it intuitively strikes within your body, either as something you have experienced or something you can easily envision as a promising experiential exploration. I will share 4 facets of consciousness, and the first is that we can only know consciousness as a miracle. We consist of physical bodies in which every particle is governed by the laws of physics. Yet those same particles cohere into a consciousness that can love, play, create, ideate, dream, feel beauty, dance, and so much more. Science is yet to explain this and may never explain it. But that does not constrain us, for we intuitively know in our bones the reality and potential of our consciousness. A miracle is something that is wondrous, unquestionably real, and occurring without any apparent explanation for its cause. Our consciousness is a miracle we can revel in. Poet and philosopher John O'Donohue said, quote, "One of the sad things today is that so many people are frightened by the wonder of their own presence. They are dying to tie themselves into a system, a role, or to an image, or to a predetermined identity that other people have actually settled on for them." End quote. This fear comes when we have not recognized, not been taught to recognize, and even taught not to recognize the miracle of our consciousness, and consequently become dependent on external validation, aligning with a crowd, often conditioned to do so by orthodoxy, ideology, or politics. To revel in the miracle of one's consciousness is to celebrate the wonder of one's own presence, and this can be a natural inborn anchor for dealing with the world. The second facet is that consciousness grants clarity to intangible value. As philosopher Michael Polanyi has pointed out, we always know far more than we have the capacity to tell. A lot of our knowledge is tacit, as opposed to explicit knowledge, which can be said or documented. An everyday example is riding a bicycle, which can be explained by the laws of physics, but knowing these laws is of no use in learning how to ride the bicycle. It can only be known through embodied memory that is beyond our capacity to explicitly describe. The same also applies to our emotions. And a formal education trains us to believe that tacit knowledge is subjective and capricious, and only objective knowledge is valuable because it is documentable and shareable. The falsehood of this claim is apparent in significant dimensions of culture, such as music. The master pianist's capacity to play is rigorously acquired and is purely tacit. Yet it is recognized as having transcendental value and is shareable to the level that it possesses commercial value. People are willing to pay for tickets to his concerts or to buy recordings of his music. What is required is that you invest your tacit sensitivities towards mindfully occupying the same space as the knowledge for a duration of time. If you ask someone what makes their life worthwhile, they are likely to name attributes such as these. All attributes we are hard-pressed to intellectually comprehend or define. Yet when experienced, they are unquestionably known as tangible reality, both individually and in meaningful moments we spend with each other. We celebrate in these values not just the wonder of one's own presence, but also the wonder of other presence. Sadly, we are often impoverished by intellectual or ideological bias that blocks wholehearted embrace of this experiential core, an experiential core that is crucial to our being. Joseph Campbell, the scholar of myth, pointed out we make a mistake in thinking we seek the meaning of life, for what we truly seek is the rapture of being alive. We find this rapture when we see in something outside us an echo of our innermost being. We find it when we live these values together with those we care about. And we find it when our myth, art, and architecture strike this resonance. The third facet is bringing rigor to consciousness. Philosopher David Chalmers has shaped the scientific investigation of consciousness by pointing out it is both an easy and hard problem. The easy problem is finding neural correlates to facets of consciousness. Advances in the technology of brain imaging have empowered great advances on this front in recent decades. The hard problem, where we are barely scratching the surface, is explaining how physical bodies produce qualitative experience. One cannot solve the hard problem through findings from the easy problem, for that would confuse causation with correlation. The hard problem is hard because it seeks an explanation of consciousness from a position outside consciousness. Our daily life precludes such a position. So it would be productive to explore possibilities within consciousness that can impart rigor to it without reliance on scientific or intellectual explanation. This approach has a history of over 2 millennia in India and other parts of the East. I would like to share 3 promising forms of praxis from this history that have also been personified by Gandhi. The first is sadhana, the Urdu word for it being riyaz. It is a form of practice that is rigorous, repetitive, immersive, and ego-transcending. It still forms the foundation for training in the performing arts and traditional crafts, finds some recognition in the fine arts, but is largely neglected in other fields. It produces 2 effects. It slowly ingrains a craft into embodied consciousness, increasing the spontaneity of mastery. The master pianist becomes one with the piano, the master carpenter one with the wood. And consciousness gradually discerns subtle yet transcendental dimensions of the craft. A prime example of this is music, and a powerful story of this is narrated in an interview with the classical vocalist Pushkar Lele, who sings in the Hindustani classical tradition of India. Lele had been learning from a young age, but after 15 years, he felt he had reached a plateau he could not transcend. So he did what many musicians of his tradition have done in a similar predicament. He changed his teacher, his guru, and started training under Vijay Sardeshmukh. Lele thought this new guru would hand him the keys to this higher realm he sought. But his guru did the opposite, pushing him down to basics, saying that for the next 6 months, for 8 hours a day, he should only sing a single note. The first note in the scale, which in Indian tradition is known as sa. Lele found this a pedantic command, but Indian tradition demands commitment to the guru. So Lele started singing sa, and one day he sang the sa his guru was waiting to hear. He saw his guru smile, and he realized that until that day, he had never hit the exact center of a note before. If we trace the lineage of this epiphany, Lele's guru is Vijay Sardeshmukh. Sardeshmukh's guru was Kumar Gandharva, and one of Kumar Gandharva's gurus very early in his career was amazingly for that time a woman called Anjani Bai Malpekar. And in an interview, Kumar Gandharva speaks about something Anjani Bai Malpekar taught him. You start with a single note, and gradually a sadhana reveals to you an entire octave within that note. These subtleties are where greatness begins. Take the example of 2 musicians, both professionally trained, one being good and the other truly great. You will not be able to fault the good musician on any technical grounds such as tunefulness or adherence to the composition. But through highly subtle shifts in microtone and timing, the great leave the good behind to break away into their own magical realm. Gandhi embodied 2 forms of sadhana, both unusual for a man in politics, generally known more as a doer than a thinker. He meditated every day, famously saying once, "I have so much to do today, I had better meditate for 2 hours instead of 1. And writing was a form of daily reflective rigor. accumulating an oeuvre of such diversity and depth that his collected writings assembled after his death were categorized into 98 volumes. The second praxis is the four paths defined by Hindu tradition that spiritual sadhana can take, best explained by Swami Vivekananda's famous text on the four yogas. The word yoga means discipline. The first is Bhakti Yoga, predicated on faith and surrender, primarily practiced through prayer, ritual, music, poetry, and dance. Karma Yoga centers on work, but dedicating work to a greater cause without selfish attachment to the fruits of the work. Raja Yoga increases mindfulness through meditative awareness, and Jnana Yoga pursues knowledge. The relative emphasis on each of these yogas varies from person to person. It is not a one-size-fits-all prescription. Gandhi echoed this when he said, "The paths are many, the truth is one." The third mode is laid out in a text from the 2nd century BCE, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Patanjali talks about Ashtanga, the 8 limbs of yoga that lay out a path of spiritual discovery. The first 2 limbs clear the ground for the rest. Yama, a set of ethical rules, and Niyama, a set of virtuous habits. And then the body comes into the picture through asana or posture, self-aware, alert, relaxed, steady. The body submits to and merges with energy around it through pranayama. Prana or breath as a primordial energy whose ebbs and flows within our bodies sustain us is the most accessible form. Pratyahara, which is to mindfully draw awareness and energy inwards. Then dharana, developing one-pointed attention. Moving to dhyana, where dharana contemplates the transcendental infinite, with the ultimate goal being samadhi, a union with the transcendental infinite. Gandhi did not ever explicitly cite Patanjali, but he clearly personified the ethical rules and virtuous habits of Yama and Niyama. And he was initiated by one of India's foremost yogis, Paramahamsa Yogananda, into Kriya, a form of meditation that calls upon the Ashtanga. Kriya is something you're supposed to practice and not speak about, for its revelations can only be known tacitly, and attempting explicit articulation is a distraction. So Gandhi never spoke or wrote about practicing Kriya. Some years after this initiation, Yogananda was asked whether he believes Gandhi has continued to practice Kriya, and he replied that Gandhi had given his word to do so. He was certain that Gandhi is a man of his word and is therefore certain Gandhi is a practitioner of Kriya. The fourth facet of consciousness is wonder and a form of consciousness called lantern consciousness. We know our brains are structured into 2 hemispheres, and it was long believed they specialize by subject. An analytical left brain dealing with language and logic, and a creative right brain dealing with image and metaphor. This belief survives in popular imagination but has long been debunked by neuroscience. It is now established that all subjects call on the participation of both hemispheres, which pay attention in different ways. Together, they hold a creative tension between attention to detail and attention to context. This has a deep evolutionary history. When we were hunter-gatherers, we needed attention to detail to hunt or gather food, while we needed a simultaneous sensitivity to context to watch out for predators. Attention to detail is unidirectional, seeking to manipulate the world. Awareness of context is multidirectional, accentuating our immersion in the world. Cognitive scientist Alison Gopnik defines these 2 modes of attention as lantern consciousness and spotlight consciousness. The spotlight's narrow beam is on detail. The lantern seeks to throw light all around on context. Children are naturals in lantern consciousness, consequently rooted in curiosity, wonder, and play. And this is primarily due to two reasons. First, the protective security of caregivers empowers playfulness by deflecting pressure to deploy the spotlight. We find this in many other species who exhibit an intelligence we empathize with. Elephants, dolphins, crows, chimpanzees, dogs, cats, all have relatively long periods of nurturing their young compared to other species. Chickens, for example, where the chick has to fend for itself very soon after emerging from the egg. Second, in humans, the prefrontal cortex, often called the executive brain, that processes decisions, sequences, logical connections, matures slowly during childhood when compared to the rest of the brain. For reasons I do not have time to explain, we tend to succumb as adults to domination by the spotlight. This is avoidable. Bringing rigor to consciousness trains lantern consciousness. Sadhana, the four yogas, Ashtanga yoga, are modes of practice to stay rooted in wonder and connected to the magic in the world. Reviewing these four facets of consciousness, if we look at the miracle of consciousness and its grasp of the intangible, we evoke the antaryami. And making consciousness rigorous to sustain wonder, we evoke the practice of satyagraha. The third section examines how satyagraha is relevant to architectural practice. Our consciousness encounters the world at three levels. There is our first person experience, where we know our consciousness most authentically. Then there is a world out there that we can connect with through our senses, and we share our perceptions with many others. So we consider it a third person account, and we call this reality. But in our daily practice, there's an intermediate level of second person mediation, where we conversationally connect with someone or something outside us, a primordial means of engagement with the world around us. We can connect this with architecture, where seminal texts and built work are the reality of third person accounts. The architect as an individual represents first person experience, and modes of practice represent second person mediation. But because of our bias towards explicit knowledge, we do not know how to adequately incorporate first person consciousness of the architect into our models of practice, and only superficially retain a perception of the architect as a personality. And we also do not know how to include the second person. And this leaves us with a very partial account of what we call reality. We need to hold all these three levels in our awareness, recognizing they are all held embedded within cultural and natural networks of practice. We know the authenticity of our own consciousness, the wonder of our own presence, but we validate it through the resonance we find through our engagement with others and the world around us. And then we reify this validation. Reification is the process of making something concrete that represents something intangible. And the stories, literature, art, and architecture we make are crucial modes of reification. They offer sites of exactitude that resist the mess of everyday life. The intentions of the artist or any claim of meaning inherent to the work are irrelevant. What matters is how the exactitude of art, its reification, offers sites of refuge that allow us to take a measure of who we are. Continuously moving across all three levels is crucial to any authenticity we may feel in our lives. Third-person accounts will be pointless abstractions, or even worse, modes of ideological persuasion, if they do not resonate with the wonder of the presence of first-person experience validated through second-person mediation. And first-person experience can turn self-indulgent if it is not validated by second-person mediation and incapable of reification into third-person accounts. To connect this to the act of design, Joseph Rickwart offers the powerful suggestion that we view design as an act of translation. Architects deal with two languages. There is a language of design process that deploys a vocabulary of ideas, drawings, sketches, models, and digital simulations. And there is a language of spatial inhabitation, whose vocabulary is completely different, consisting of embodied immersion, sensory experience, the full range of consciousness, the rhythm of time, and embodied memory. Given the difference between these two vocabularies, design is an act of translation from the language of design process into the language of spatial inhabitation. Then Rickwart makes a significant observation. In translation, one needs far greater fluency in the language being translated into than the language translated from. If I'm translating a poem from English into German, I need enough English to understand and appreciate the poem with all its nuance. But to be a good translator, I must be a masterful poet in German. Architects tend to misplace their attention, prioritizing fluency in design process. And this is exacerbated by an inward turn that focuses towards peer review to assess the value of the work done. We should prioritize our fluency in spatial inhabitation, and this is best explored and validated through the practice of Satyagraha, which seeks to rigorously come to terms with the core of being truly human before attempting anything else. How can the language of architectural design process be conducive to translation? I offer 8 proposals on spatial pattern, not a comprehensive list, but suggesting an approach. The first is mental mapping. We are inside architectural space, so can never see it in its entirety. The space must have qualities of enclosure and scale by which it can be conceptualized in our minds in a way friendly to the inhabiting body. This must apply to singular spaces as well as conglomerations of spaces. Architects tend to privilege focused vision. As Juhani Pallasmaa, the renowned architect and theorist, has observed, focused vision sets up a distance between spectator and object, whereas peripheral vision immerses us within space. We must go beyond the precise delineation of form that focused vision favors, and also attend to the gradations of scaled and textured enclosure that support peripheral vision. Ambiguity, a word that should be differentiated from vagueness, for it does not imply a fog perception, but an offering of a multiplicity of choices, each one of them precise. Even simple designs can be layered to empower multiple perceptions and experiences, as shown by this plan of the tomb of Ahmed Shah in Ahmedabad. Or this doorway in Tughlakabad, whose design marks out many doorways, each nested within the other, each relative to a distance from which it is to be experienced. The largest doorway may offer a grandeur appropriate from a distance of 100 meters. As you come closer, smaller scales offer themselves to you. And the doorway you finally pass through physically is scaled so that it can be related to the size of the human body. Stillness, crafting the detail and the whole to resonate with the same spirit. So whichever way the gaze or body moves, the same spirit manifests, evoking stillness. Liminal spaces such as verandas, bay windows, niches, thresholds that lie in between primary spaces to offer a presence that resists the compulsions of time and purpose that often overwhelm primary space. How does one evoke infinity when one's intervention is confined to a single project? Using the work of Geoffrey Bava, I propose 5 possibilities: opening up to vista, interlocking layers, where layers in the center of the courtyard of the project interlock with layers that are outward, and then to the street and to the neighborhood, and so on. Lining the edge of the project with nature, or with light, or rescaling depth. How does one label the spaces of a design? We tend to use functional labels, so the design becomes a function map. What if we sought to make it an experience map using poetic experiential labels? Instead of living room, a place for convivial gathering filled with delight, color, and memory, but able to transform into a nourishing shelter for solitude. Instead of dining room, a joyous place for rhythmic familial bonding, circling to face inward toward each other, amplified by the sensory delight of food. Inhabitation plays out over time to breed memories that are absorbed into the grain of the space in which they are created. And we should choose our materials, tectonic elements, scale, light to propagate the embedment of memory. This brings me to my concluding section, which is only 2 slides. Satyagraha seeks connection with the intangible and demands surrender to greater reality. So, practice founded on Satyagraha is not a place amenable to detailed control. It is like a garden that can, at best, be nurtured through small daily acts of love to gradually align its authenticity with our own, where the consequence of each act of love offers clues on what the next act should be. The revelations of Satyagraha and their translation are neither rapid nor linear. They must be gradually absorbed into our consciousness with much forbearance needed for consequent mastery of the poetic. This is captured most eloquently in the soul prose work of the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke when he said, "And still, it is not enough to have memories. One must be able to forget them when they are many, and one must have the great patience to wait until they come again. For it is not yet the memories themselves. Not until they have turned to blood within us, to glance, to gesture, nameless and no longer to be distinguished from ourselves. Not until then can it happen that in a most rare hour, the first word of a verse arises in their midst and goes forth from them." Thank you.